You found the podcast, Go Beyond the Brief, where we take a deep dive into the societal currents shaping our lives. Together, we'll explore the often unseen forces at play. We'll examine the research, dissect the data, and most importantly, if you're seeking to understand what's shaping our society,
In February 2025, a
this is the
major
place.
digital asset service provider was, well, they basically watched a disaster unfold in real time.
A completely silent disaster, yeah.
Right, totally silent. Alarms were blaring across all their internal dashboards, but, there was no shattered glass, no drilled vault, no getaway car peeling out of a parking lot.
Just screens.
Just screens. Instead, these compliance teams watched completely helplessly as a piece of malicious code just systematically bypassed their security architecture and drained $1.5 billion from their hot wallets.
$1.5 billion.
Gone. Siphoned across the blockchain in just a matter of minutes, destined for state-sponsored laundering operations. And, when you hear national security, you usually picture, like, fighter jets or carrier strike groups or border patrol.
The physical stuff.
Exactly, the tangible things. But the reality of 2026 is that the most consequential battlefront on the planet it's entirely invisible. It is a war being fought inside server farms, across distributed ledgers, and deep within the application programming interfaces of the global financial system.
And it's a war that affects literally everyone listening.
Right. So today, we are mapping out that battlefield. We're taking you inside this digital arms race between industrial-scale financial criminals on one side and the regulatory technologists trying to build a trap that they just can't escape.
And the sheer mechanics of this conflict are, they're staggering. We are looking at a landscape where artificial intelligence models are deployed as autonomous financial detectives, right?
Yeah.
Where cryptographic zero-knowledge proofs are actually replacing physical ID cards, and where law enforcement is trying to trace funds that are specifically engineered to be untraceable. And the stakes here, they really couldn't be higher.
Because it's not just about a bank losing money.
No, not at all. If these defensive technologies fail, it doesn't just mean a bank takes a capital hit. It means sanctioned nation-states successfully fund weapons programs. It means transnational syndicates operate with total impunity. The architecture of your personal financial data, the security of the global economy, and, frankly, geopolitical stability are all entirely dependent on who wins this digital arms race.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand who is actually winning, we are pulling apart a massive, highly detailed piece of research today. We are doing a deep dive into the March 2026 congressional report published by the U.S. Treasury. It's titled Innovative Technologies to Counter Illicit Finance Involving Digital Assets.
It's a hefty document.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct exactly how AI, blockchain graph analytics, and digital identities are actually functioning at the code level and the policy level to detect illicit transactions. But before we jump in, a quick but crucial ground rule for how we're approaching this today.
Right, the political context.
Yeah. The Treasury's report was legally mandated by the Genius Act, which was a major piece of legislation passed by the Trump administration in 2025. But this deep dive is strictly about the mechanics. We're examining the factual policy mandates, the software architecture, and the national security implications.
Neutral ground.
Completely neutral ground. We are looking at this without endorsing any political platforms or viewpoints, left or right. Our goal is just to impartially report on the technology and the ideas contained in the original source material.
Which, honestly, is the only way to genuinely understand the scope of the issue. The mathematical reality of how a blockchain ledger operates or, how a neural network processes transaction data that doesn't change based on who is sitting in the Oval Office.
All right, math doesn't have a political party.
Exactly. Policymakers across the entire spectrum are just realizing that they are up against a machine that moves way, way faster than traditional legislation can handle.
So let's start by sizing up that machine, the threat landscape. We often hold on to this really outdated mental model of like the lone hacker in a dark room wearing a hoodie, typing furiously.
Right, Hollywood version.
Yeah, the Hollywood version. But the Treasury report paints a picture of adversaries that operate with the structural efficiency of multinational corporations. And to grasp the advantage these syndicates have, we really have to look at the sheer volume of the ecosystem they are hiding inside.
Volume is absolutely the primary weapon of the adversary here. According to the Treasury's data, by early 2025, successful monthly transactions on public blockchains hit 3.8 billion.
Billion, with a B.
With a B. That represents a 96% year-over-year increase. When you have nearly 4 billion transactions settling every single month, the traditional manual review processes that legacy banks have relied on for decades, they mathematically collapse.
You just can't keep up.
You can't. You cannot throw human compliance officers at a 3.8 billion transaction problem.
So the scale is paralyzing. If you are a financial investigator, you aren't looking for a needle in a haystack. You're basically looking for a single drop of poisoned water in the middle of a torrential monsoon.
That's a great way to put it.
And the organizations pouring that poisoned water into the system, they're highly sophisticated. The report segments these adversaries, and I want to start with the one inflicting the most immediate financial trauma on just everyday citizens, the transnational scam syndicate.
The pig butchering operations.
Yeah. The report specifically highlights pig butchering scams. Let's break down the mechanics of this, because I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just a phishing email, I wouldn't fall for that. But it is so much more insidious than that.
It really is. So pig butchering is actually a translation of a Chinese phrase, and it refers to the practice of slowly fattening up a victim before the slaughter. These are industrial-scale operations. They are primarily physically located in Southeast Asia, places like Burma, Cambodia, and Laos.
And they aren't just a couple of guys in an office.
No, they operate out of massive compounds. And tragically, they often use trafficked labor to run what are essentially these giant psychological manipulation call centers. And they specifically target American citizens.
And it starts so simply, right?
It begins with a completely innocuous point of contact.
Yeah.
Like a seemingly accidental text message on your phone. Something like, "Are we still meeting for coffee?" Or, "Hey, is this John's number?"
I get those all the time.
Right. Most people do. And when the victim politely replies, "Sorry, you have the wrong number," the operator on the other end follows a highly scripted, psychologically optimized decision tree to strike up a conversation.
I've actually seen some of the internal manuals from these compounds that have leaked online. They literally read like predatory enterprise sales training.
They do.
They have specific scripts for targeting widows. They have specific scripts for targeting lonely tech workers. They spend weeks, sometimes months, building this parasocial relationship. They don't ask for money up front. That's the trick.
Exactly. That would set off alarm bells.
Yeah. They just slowly weave in mentions of their own supposed wealth, which they usually attribute to a proprietary digital asset trading platform.
And this is where the technological trap finally springs. They eventually convince the victim to just download a trading app or visit a web platform. And these platforms are visually flawless clones of legitimate exchanges, or they're bespoke applications designed to look incredibly sophisticated.
So it looks totally real.
It looks completely legitimate. So the victim deposits a small amount, say $1,000, just to try it out. The platform's backend, which is controlled entirely by the scammers, artificially manipulates the dashboard to show a massive profit.
So you log in and suddenly your $1,000 looks like $5,000.
Right. And they even allow the victim to withdraw some of those initial profits.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they let you pull the money out to build ultimate trust.
It's the illusion of liquidity. Because once the victim believes they can pull their money out anytime they want, the psychological barrier just completely drops. I've read stories where people liquidate their entire retirement accounts, they take out second mortgages.
It's devastating.
And once that massive deposit hits the scammer's wallet, the platform just locks the victim out. They usually claim they need to pay a tax or some sort of security fee to release the funds, basically just squeezing them for every last possible cent before completely disappearing. The devastation is total.
The numbers really reflect that totality. In 2024, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, they logged over $9 billion in total crypto fraud losses.
$9 billion.
And crucially, $5.8 billion of that was specifically tied to these digital asset investment schemes. That is a 47% spike from the year prior. We're watching billions of dollars of American retail wealth being systematically extracted and routed overseas.
That covers the consumer extraction side, which is awful. But the report immediately pivots to a profoundly different type of adversary. Because this isn't just about stealing retirement funds to buy luxury cars. It's about stealing billions to fund ballistic missiles.
Right. The nation-state actors.
We have to examine the nation-state actors, specifically the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea.
For the DPRK, digital asset theft is a primary pillar of state revenue. They are heavily sanctioned. They're largely cut off from the traditional global financial system. So to fund their regime, and specifically their weapons of mass destruction programs, they have effectively weaponized their intelligence services into elite cybercrime syndicates.
The $1.5 billion heist we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
That is their hallmark. Between January 2024 and September 2025, the Treasury estimates the DPRK stole at least $2.8 billion from digital asset service providers.
I want to pause on their method here because it's fascinating. They aren't usually executing, like, brute force cryptographic attacks against the actual blockchain protocol, right?
Yeah.
I mean, breaking the SHA-256 encryption of Bitcoin is essentially impossible with current computing power.
Correct. You can't hack the math.
So how are they actually getting in?
They attack the human layer and the peripheral software architecture. They use highly aggressive, highly targeted social engineering. For example, a DPRK operative might spend months posing as a tech recruiter on a professional networking site.
Like LinkedIn or something.
Right. They build a relationship with a senior developer who works at a major digital asset exchange. They offer them a really lucrative new job, maybe a massive salary bump, and they send them a PDF containing the job offer, or maybe a coding assessment test.
And let me guess, the PDF is loaded.
Exactly. The moment that developer opens that file on their work computer, malicious payloads deploy. This gives the DPRK a backdoor directly into the exchange's internal network. From there, they map the architecture, they locate the private cryptographic keys that control the exchange's hot wallets, and they drain the funds.
Just bypassing the vault door entirely by tricking the guy holding the keys?
Precisely.
So we have transnational scam centers, and we have rogue nation states. The third pillar of this threat landscape, detailed in the report, is ransomware. And this is a really fascinating economic model because it relies almost entirely on the perceived anonymity of digital assets to even function.
Ransomware is essentially a business model of extortion. Criminal groups infiltrate a corporate or municipal network, they encrypt all the proprietary data, and they demand a ransom to provide the decryption key.
And that ransom is almost universally demanded in crypto, right?
Almost universally, because if criminals had to demand a wire transfer to a traditional bank like a Wells Fargo or Chase, they would be caught immediately. The money trail would be instantaneous.
Right, you can't just wire $1 million to Ransomware Gang LLC.
Exactly. The velocity and the cross-border nature of digital assets makes the extortion viable. According to FinCEN data, reported ransomware payments hit a staggering $1.1 billion in 2023.
Now, I noticed in the report that the number actually fell in 2024. It dropped to roughly $734 million, which, on paper, that looks like a victory. But I suspect the reality is a bit more complicated than just we're beating ransomware.
It's a very nuanced drop. A significant portion of that decrease is actually due to incredibly aggressive, coordinated operations by international law enforcement. The FBI and international partners have physically seized the servers of major ransomware gangs. They've disrupted their infrastructure, and in some cases, they've even recovered the decryption keys.
So they're going on the offensive.
They are. Furthermore, corporations are heavily investing in decentralized backups and zero-trust network architecture, meaning they are simply refusing to pay the ransom because they can restore their systems independently now.
That makes sense.
However, $734 million extorted in a single year is still a massive capitalization of criminal enterprise. And beyond ransomware, you have outright state-level sanctions evasion.
Right. The report details how adversary jurisdictions are actively building entirely alternative financial rails, like Russia engineering a ruble-backed stablecoin explicitly designed to bypass Western sanctions.
Or Iranian entities utilizing digital asset networks to settle illicit international oil sales without ever touching the SWIFT banking system.
Which really forces a realization about the nature of this technology. Digital assets offer instantaneous cross-border value transfer without routing through a traditional correspondent banking system that might, flag or block the transaction.
It's not just a regulatory headache anymore.
Right. When billions of dollars flow seamlessly into the hands of sanctioned states or terrorist organizations or cyber syndicates, it actively degrades global geopolitical stability.
It does.
This raises the fundamental question that policymakers must have been absolutely screaming during the drafting of the Genius Act. If the NSA and the FBI and the Treasury know exactly what the DPRK is doing and they know exactly how the pig butchering syndicates are operating, the ledger is public. We can see the money moving. Why can't we just stop it?
Because seeing the money move and having the jurisdictional authority and the technological capability to intervene are two entirely different things.
Okay, break that down for me.
The Treasury report identifies a series of profound structural vulnerabilities in the global regulatory framework. The most glaring of these is what they call jurisdictional arbitrage.
Let's dissect jurisdictional arbitrage. Because in a traditional banking context, if a bank operates in the U.S., it follows U.S. law. If it operates in the U.K., it follows U.K. law. It's pretty straightforward. But digital asset service providers, these SPICs, they don't necessarily have a physical footprint that dictates their regulatory reality. So how do they actually structure themselves to play this game?
They intentionally fracture their corporate structure across borders to create this crazy legal labyrinth. A DASPAR might incorporate its parent holding company in a remote island nation that has zero anti-money laundering regulations. Then they might lease server space in a second country that has incredibly strict data privacy laws that prevent outside audits. Then they employ their executive team and their developers in a third country. And finally, they offer their trading platform globally via the internet.
That is, wow. Jurisdictional arbitrage is basically a game of financial whack-a-mole. You regulate them out of one country, and they just popped up in a jurisdiction with zero rules.
Exactly. So when the U.S. Treasury subpoenas them because, say, a North Korean wallet just dumped $50 million onto their exchange, what do you think happens?
The exchange just ignores them.
They simply claim that they do not fall under U.S. jurisdiction. They argue that because their holding company is registered elsewhere, they have absolutely no legal obligation to comply with U.S. Bank Secrecy Act mandates, meaning they won't freeze the funds and they won't hand over customer identification records.
So they arbitrage the lack of global regulatory harmony. They intentionally set up shop in the weakest link of the international system.
And it provides a massive, unregulated off-ramp for illicit funds.
But the vulnerability isn't exclusively a foreign problem, right? The report makes it very clear that there is a massive compliance failure happening right inside the United States.
Yes, there is. The second major vulnerability is domestic noncompliance. Under U.S. law, if you are providing digital asset transmission services, you are generally classified as a money services business or MSB.
Which means what, legally?
This legally requires you to register with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and implement a robust anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism program, AML and CFT. But numerous entities operate within the U.S., or they actively court U.S. customers while blatantly refusing to register.
How do they get away with courting U.S. customers without getting caught?
They might advise their American users to utilize virtual private networks, VPNs, to mask their IP addresses.
Oh, so the company can say, we didn't know they were American. Their IP address said they were in Germany.
Exactly. It gives the company plausible deniability. And without an AML program in place, these platforms just become a frictionless superhighway for money laundering.
And then we get to the third vulnerability, which is perhaps the most visible to the average person listening right now. Digital asset kiosks, which are commonly known as crypto ATMs.
Yes, the kiosks.
I see these everywhere now, in convenience stores, gas stations, shopping malls, and the interface is incredibly simple. You feed in physical fiat cash, and it sends Bitcoin to a wallet address you scan on your phone.
Why are these specific machines such a massive vector for fraud?
Because their compliance models are historically abysmal, and the transaction is instant and irreversible. Scammers absolutely depend on these kiosks. Let's go back to the pig butchering scenario, or even a simpler tech support scam where, an elderly person is told their bank account is compromised.
Right, the classic "I'm calling for Microsoft" scam. Exactly. The scammer will stay on the phone with the victim and physically direct them to drive to a specific crypto ATM at a local gas station. And why that specific ATM? Because the scammer knows that particular kiosk operator does not require a driver's license scan or any meaningful identity verification for transactions under a certain dollar amount.
So the scammer literally walks the victim through, withdrawing their life savings in physical cash, feeding it into the machine bill by bill, and sending it to a wallet controlled by the syndicate.
Bill by bill. The velocity of the loss is horrifying. The FBI's IC3 data for 2024 logged over 10,900 individual complaints specifically involving these kiosks.
Wow.
And that culminated in $246.7 million in losses. $250 million, primarily extracted from vulnerable populations, fed directly into these physical machines.
So you have this terrifying triad of vulnerabilities. You have offshore platforms hiding behind legal loopholes, domestic platforms refusing to comply, and thousands of physical kiosks acting as untraceable fiat to crypto on-ramps. The U.S. government looked at this failing infrastructure and realized that the underlying legal framework was totally ill-equipped for a high-speed digital reality.
It was broken.
And this is the exact friction point that generated the Genius Act.
The Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act, signed in July 2025.
Such a long acronym.
They always are. While the headline feature of the Genius Act was establishing a comprehensive regulatory framework for dollar-pegged stablecoins, its secondary mandate is what generated the Treasury report we're dissecting today.
Right.
The legislation legally forced the Treasury to evaluate how regulated financial institutions must modernize. They had to figure out how to integrate cutting-edge technology, AI, machine learning, application programming interfaces into their compliance architecture.
Because the existing architecture is based on the Bank Secrecy Act, which was written in 1970. I mean, think about that. We are trying to regulate a system processing 3.8 billion global transactions a month using a philosophy designed for a world where bank tellers physically stamped paper checks.
Precisely. The Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 is the foundation of American anti-money laundering efforts. It dictates that financial institutions must keep meticulous records. They have to file currency transaction reports for cash deposits over $10,000, and they have to file suspicious activity reports, or SARs, when they detect potential crime.
But the BSA is intentionally technology agnostic, isn't it?
It is. It dictates the outcome the government wants against the launderers, but it doesn't mandate how a bank should achieve that outcome. For decades, banks relied on manual reviews and incredibly basic software.
And the Treasury is explicitly acknowledging in this report that the 1970 playbook is completely dead. You cannot catch a highly sophisticated machine with human labor. So the Treasury outlined 3 core policy principles for the future. And I want to look closely at these because they represent a massive shift in how the government interacts with bank technology.
Let's hear them.
First, they want to actively promote responsible innovation in AML and CFT. Second, they want to collaborate with stakeholders. And third, they want to coordinate and harmonize requirements across different regulatory bodies.
That third point is the critical one.
Why is that?
Because historically, banks have been terrified of adopting new technology due to regulatory uncertainty. Imagine a bank replaces its old clunky transaction monitoring system with a state-of-the-art machine learning model. If that new model accidentally misses a single laundering transaction, the bank faces massive fines from their examiners.
And examiners are the federal auditors who physically review a bank's compliance program, right?
Right. So the Treasury is stating that they must harmonize the standards so that examiners understand and support the use of advanced tech, rather than immediately penalizing banks for trying to upgrade.
They're trying to remove the fear of innovation.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the core of the technological revolution detailed in the report. Artificial intelligence. This is the ultimate double-edged sword. But before we get into the adversarial, how the bad guys use it, let's look at how institutions are deploying it defensively. And I want to push past the buzzwords here. We hear AI everywhere. In the context of a financial institution trying to catch a criminal, how does AI actually operate differently from the old software?
Okay, so the old software relies on rules-based systems. These are rigid, heuristic models built on simple if-then logic. For example, a rule might dictate, if a customer transfers $9,999, flag the transaction.
Why that specific number?
Because the reporting threshold is $10,000, and the system assumes the customer is structuring their transaction to evade the report.
But criminals aren't stupid. They know exactly what the rules-based parameters are. They just write an algorithm to structure their transfers at, $7,450 at random intervals to slip under that static threshold.
Exactly. Rules-based systems are static, and criminals are dynamic. Furthermore, rules-based systems generate an absolute avalanche of false positive.
Like what?
A legitimate business owner depositing cash from their restaurant might trigger 5 alerts a week, forcing a human compliance officer to manually investigate and clear every single one. It drains immense resources. And this is where artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning and generative AI, fundamentally changes the paradigm.
How does a large language model, an LLM, which, most people associate with chatbots writing emails or college essays, how does that actually help a compliance officer?
LLMs excel at processing massive volumes of unstructured data. Consider something called ad-race media screening.
What's it?
When a bank opens a corporate account, they must verify if the executives are tied to corruption or crime. Traditionally, a human analyst would search global news databases, trying to translate and read articles. An LLM can be deployed to ingest millions of global news reports, legal filings, and foreign court documents simultaneously.
In seconds.
In seconds, it can understand context across dozens of languages, identify really obscure connections between a shell company and a known criminal, and synthesize a comprehensive risk profile instantly.
Oh, wow.
Beyond that, institutions are using GenAI to draft the actual narrative sections of the suspicious activity reports. The AI can take complex, multi-layered transaction data and translate it into a clear, concise summary for law enforcement, saving thousands of human hours.
Okay, so that handles the documentation side. But how does AI actually track the money moving across the blockchain? Because the ledger is just a massive web of alphanumeric addresses. How does an AI spot the crime happening in real time?
Through advanced graph analysis and entity resolution, machine learning models are incredibly adept at finding patterns within vast, complex networks. When criminals steal funds, they deploy obfuscation techniques. One is smurfing, breaking a massive deposit into thousands of microtransactions. Another is chain hopping,
Moving the funds from the Bitcoin blockchain over to the Ethereum blockchain and then to the Solana blockchain, basically hoping the investigators lose the trail.
Exactly. A simple rules-based system only looks at isolated linear events. It sees a withdrawal here and a deposit there, but it fails to connect them.
But a graph neural network looks at the entire ecosystem holistically.
Yes. The AI maps the relationships between millions of wallets simultaneously. It analyzes behavioral patterns, the velocity of the transfers, the specific sequence of smart contracts being utilized, the correlation of timestamps across different blockchains. The model has been trained on massive data sets of known illicit typologies.
So it knows what the crime looks like mathematically.
Exactly. It can look at a seemingly random cluster of 10,000 microtransactions across 3 different networks and definitively say, this mathematical pattern matches the precise laundering behavior of the Lazarus group from North Korea. It instantly resolves those thousands of anonymous wallets into a single illicit entity and triggers a freeze.
The capability is phenomenal, but the Treasury report does not shy away from the immense hurdles of implementing this. I have to imagine building a proprietary graph neural network to monitor billions of transactions isn't exactly cheap.
The cost is a profound barrier. Developing, training, and running inference on these models requires massive computational power and highly specialized engineers. A top-tier multinational bank can afford a $100 million AI compliance budget.
Sure, JP Morgan can pay for it.
Right. But the local credit union serving a small town cannot. This creates a dangerous vulnerability gap in the financial system, where sophisticated criminals will naturally target smaller institutions that are still relying on outdated rules-based software because they simply can't afford the AI upgrade.
And there's also the issue of the training data itself, right? Because if an AI is learning how to spot financial crime based on 20 years of historical banking data, it is going to inherit all the biases present in that historical data.
Bias in machine learning is a critical concern raised by the report. If historical law enforcement priorities disproportionately targeted specific demographics or specific types of businesses, say cash-intensive immigrant-owned businesses, the AI model will internalize those biases.
It'll just repeat the human errors of the past.
Worse, it might systematically flag legitimate transactions from certain communities while completely ignoring subtle, sophisticated corporate fraud because it doesn't match its biased training data.
I want to push back on the operational reality of this for a moment. Let's assume a mid-sized bank successfully implements a highly advanced neural network. The AI analyzes a complex web of transactions, determines a customer is laundering money, and completely locks their account, freezing millions of dollars. The customer complains, and a federal examiner from FinCEN walks into the bank and says, explain exactly why you froze this account. What is the precise logic?
Right.
How does the compliance officer answer? Because deep learning models operate as a black box. The neural network weights and biases process the data in ways that even the engineers who built it can't always reverse engineer into a simple English sentence. You can't just look an auditor in the eye and say, I have no idea why we froze the money. The computer algorithm just told me to.
You have just articulated the exact anxiety paralyzing the industry right now. The Bank Secrecy Act fundamentally requires explainability. You must be able to justify your compliance decisions. If you are operating a black box, you cannot audit the decision-making process. This is the primary reason banks are terrified of turning off their old systems.
Wait, so what are they doing?
They are forced to run parallel runs. They are paying to operate their inefficient legacy system alongside their expensive new AI system, just so they have a manual backup to show the examiners. It is financially unsustainable.
So what is the solution? How do we regulate a black box?
What's fascinating here is that the report heavily emphasizes a framework developed by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's called the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. It is a highly rigorous, standardized set of guidelines for governing, mapping, and measuring the risks of AI systems.
How does that help with the explainability problem, though?
It forces developers to document the model's intended purpose, rigidly validate the integrity of the training data, and implement specific techniques to ensure a baseline level of explainability. What the financial industry is desperately lobbying for, and what the Treasury report suggests, is for regulators to formally endorse this NIST framework as a safe harbor.
Meaning, if a bank can prove they built and managed their AI strictly according to the NIST standards, the regulators agree not to penalize them if the model makes a mistake, or if the inner workings are somewhat opaque.
Exactly. They need a regulatory green light that says, we trust the framework, therefore we accept the model's outputs. Without that safe harbor, the adoption of AI defense will just remain stalled.
Which is terrifying, because the adoption of AI offense by the criminals is not stalled at all. The report's detailing of adversarial AI it's chilling. The syndicates are weaponizing generative AI to completely bypass the foundational security of the banking system, the Customer Identification Program, or CIP.
Right. To open an account, an institution must verify you are a real human being. Criminals are now using Gen AI to mass-produce synthetic identities. And this isn't just photoshopping a name on a stolen driver's license.
That's way more advanced.
Way more. They combine stolen, personally identifiable information, say a real social security number, with a completely AI-generated human face. They use AI to generate highly convincing, perfectly scaled digital images of driver's licenses and passports featuring this non-existent person.
But most modern fintech apps require a liveness check, right? Like you hold up your phone, the app tells you to turn your head to the left, blink twice, smile. It uses the depth sensors in the camera to prove a three-dimensional living human is holding the device.
Yeah.
How does a synthetic image beat that?
But hijacking the hardware interface. Criminals use sophisticated emulator software to inject deepfake video feeds directly into the application layer. The banking app requests access to the phone's camera.
Okay.
The emulator intercepts that request and feeds the app an AI-generated video stream of the synthetic face turning its head and blinking in perfect synchronization with the app's prompts.
Wait, they bypass the camera entirely?
Exactly. The app thinks it's talking to the camera, but it's really talking to a deepfake engine. The app's security protocols analyze the video, they detect the micro-expressions and the liveness markers perfectly generated by the AI, and they approve the account. The criminal now has a fully verified, high-limit financial account tied to a ghost.
If the visual verification systems we have relied on for a century are compromised by deepfakes, the entire concept of identity has to evolve. We can no longer trust our eyes or a high-resolution video feed. We have to move away from visual proof and move toward cryptographic proof. Which brings us to the connective tissue of this new security paradigm: digital identity and APIs.
Digital identity verification is really the only viable countermeasure to synthetic deepfakes. And when the Treasury report discusses identity proofing, they are looking at both people and what they term non-person entities, or NPEs.
An NPE would be a corporation, a specific algorithmic smart contract, or even a connected hardware device, right?
Correct. You need a way to mathematically prove that the entity initiating a transfer is actually authorized to do so. For human beings, the transition is moving toward mobile driver's licenses, or MDLs, and it is vital to understand that an MDL is not a JPEG image of your ID stored in your Apple Wallet.
Right, it's not a photo.
It is a cryptographic credential securely stored in the specialized hardware enclave of your device. It communicates with verification systems using public key cryptography. But the true paradigm shift the industry is pushing for is portable digital ID.
Let's explore the mechanics of a portable ID. Because right now, the system is highly redundant and insecure. If I open an account with Chase, I give them my social security number, my physical address, a scan of my passport, they store it. Then I go open an account on Coinbase. I have to upload all that exact same data again, they store it. I am creating dozens of honeypots of my most sensitive personal data across the internet, just waiting for one of those companies to suffer a data breach.
A portable digital ID solves that vulnerability through cryptography. In this model, a highly trusted, regulated entity, perhaps a government agency or a consortium of Tier 1 banks, verifies your physical identity one single time.
Just once.
Just once. They then issue a cryptographic credential to your secure digital wallet. When you go to Coinbase to open an account, You do not upload your passport. You do not give them your social security number. You interact with their system using a zero-knowledge proof.
Zero-knowledge proofs are one of the most elegant concepts in cryptography, but they can be hard to wrap your head around. How does this actually work in the context of proving identity without sharing data?
Think of it like, well, a zero-knowledge proof is a cryptographic protocol that allows one party to prove to another party that a specific statement is true without revealing any actual information beyond the mere fact of its truth. Let's apply it to a crypto exchange.
Yeah.
The exchange's compliance protocol requires users to be over 18 years old and not residing in a sanctioned country like North Korea. Instead of handing over your birth date and home address, your digital wallet generates a complex mathematical proof, often using technologies like ZK snarks. This proof mathematically verifies that the credentials held in your wallet satisfy the exchange's parameters.
So it's like a bouncer at a club who just gets a green light that says over 21, but never actually sees your ID or knows your birthday.
That's a perfect analogy. The exchange receives the cryptographic proof, verifies the math, and approves your account. They know with absolute certainty that you are of legal age and legally located, but they have zero knowledge of your actual birth date, your street address, or your raw identity data.
It fulfills a regulatory compliance mandate while entirely preserving consumer privacy and completely eliminating the data honeypot. And the regulatory momentum for this is already building globally. The report points out that the U.S. is actually lagging behind the European Union in this arena.
Significantly behind. The report highlights the EU's eIDAS 2.0 regulation. This is a massive legislative framework that mandates all member states must provide their citizens with a European digital identity wallet by late 2026.
That's coming up fast.
Very fast.
Yeah.
Furthermore, by late 2027, regulated financial institutions and DASPs operating in the EU will be legally required to accept these digital wallets for customer onboarding. It will radically standardize cross-border compliance and theoretically obliterate the synthetic identity deepfake problem, because a deepfake video cannot generate a valid cryptographic zero-knowledge proof.
The scale of the identity problem in the U.S. definitely requires a structural fix like that. The report cites a staggering metric from FinCEN. In 2021 alone, they received 1.6 million Bank Secrecy Act reports related to identity issues, which correlated to $212 billion in suspicious activity. But establishing a secure digital identity is only half of the transaction equation. Let's say I have a cryptographically verified ID. I initiate a transfer from my bank to a digital asset platform. The bank needs to instantly verify my ID, query a blockchain analytics database to ensure the destination wallet isn't associated with terrorism, and then authorize the clearing of the funds. They need a half-dozen disparate software architectures to communicate and execute complex logic in a matter of milliseconds. How is that functionally achieved?
It is achieved through application programming interfaces, or APIs. APIs are the structural foundation of modern digital commerce.
I want to be precise about how an API functions in a compliance setting, because it's not just a portal. Think of an API as the universal translator at a UN summit for software. It allows an old-school legacy banking system to instantly talk to a cutting-edge blockchain scanner. It defines the exact rules, protocols, and data structures required for two entirely different software applications to talk to each other. If my legacy bank's mainframe is built on COBOL from the 1980s, and the blockchain analytics firm is running a cutting-edge cloud-based machine learning model, they cannot inherently understand each other. The API acts as the standardized contract between them.
Precisely. Let's look at a concrete example from the report. The OFAC Sanctions List Service API. The Office of Foreign Assets Control maintains the master list of individuals, companies, and crypto wallets sanctioned by the U.S. government. In the past, a bank's compliance officer would literally download a massive CSV spreadsheet from the government website every morning and manually cross-reference it.
Manually reading a spreadsheet.
Yeah. With the API, the bank's internal transaction processing software continuously sends automated requests called webhooks or API calls directly to the Treasury's database. When a customer hits send on a transfer, the bank system instantly packages the destination wallet data into a JSON payload, fires it through the API to OFAC, and receives a standardized risk score response in milliseconds.
Before the money even moves.
Exactly. If the API returns a flag indicating the wallet was just added to the sanctions list 10 minutes ago, the automated system halts the transaction before it ever settles to the ledger.
It shifts compliance from a reactive, post-transaction autopsy into a proactive, real-time barrier. But again, implementing this is incredibly complex. Why hasn't every single financial institution fully integrated these API networks?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, The biggest hurdles here aren't really technological, but operational. The Treasury report outlines three massive operational hurdles. The first is technological fragmentation. There is no single unified standard for digital identity or risk scoring. We have competing state-level ID initiatives, federal databases, and international frameworks. If the API endpoints are not standardized, the integration fails.
What's the second hurdle?
The second hurdle is financial. Integrating high-speed, secure API architecture into a fragile legacy core banking system is a nightmare of software engineering. It requires highly specialized developers and massive IT budgets, which, again, disenfranchises smaller community banks.
And the third hurdle brings us right back to the Genius Act, the regulatory mismatch.
Yes. The Bank Secrecy Act paradigm relies on human review and documented audit trails. When an automated API network is querying a blockchain analytics model and executing a block on a transaction in 40 milliseconds, regulators struggle to audit that process. If a legitimate transaction is incorrectly blocked by an automated API call, who is legally liable? The bank, the analytics firm providing the data, the government database. The legal framework hasn't caught up to the latency of the technology.
Okay, let's push the scenario forward. Let's say the identity is verified, the APIs process the checks, and the funds legally move onto the public blockchain. This is where the cat and mouse game truly begins. Because once the money is on a public ledger like Bitcoin or Ethereum, it is visible to everyone forever. Theoretically, tracking illicit funds should be trivial. You just follow the alphanumeric string. But the criminals actively deploy countermeasures to shatter the tracing algorithms.
The transparency of the ledger is exactly what allows blockchain analytics firms to function. They use address attribution, running massive data scraping operations to map anonymous wallet addresses to known real-world entities. But illicit actors are highly aware of the heuristics these tools use. They employ tactics designed specifically to introduce noise into the data graph.
Let's break down some of these tactics, starting with one that targets the human element rather than the code. Address poisoning.
Address poisoning is a brilliant, entirely psychological attack based on user interface mechanics. Let's say you frequently send stablecoins to your business partner. Your partner's wallet address is a long, complex string of 42 alphanumeric characters. Because humans cannot memorize that, you rely on your wallet app's transaction history. You scroll down to the last time you paid them, copy the address, and paste it into the send field.
Right, everyone does that. And the criminals know this user behavior.
Exactly. So the criminal uses an automated script to monitor your wallet. They use a vanity address generator to create a malicious wallet address that has the exact same first 4 characters and the exact same last 4 characters as your business partner's wallet. The middle characters are completely different, but humans generally only visually verify the beginning and the end of a string. The criminal then sends a microtransaction, a fraction of a cent from their lookalike wallet, to your wallet.
So now this poisoned lookalike address appears in my recent transaction history.
Yes.
Yeah.
The next time you go to pay your partner, you open your history, you see an address that visually matches your partner's, you copy it, and you accidentally send a $50,000 payment directly to the criminal. It bypasses all algorithmic security because the user legitimately authorized the transfer.
That is terrifyingly simple. But what about tactics designed to defeat the AI tracking models? The report discusses peel chains. How does a peel chain evade detection?
A peel chain is an automated structuring mechanism designed to avoid triggering velocity or volume alerts. If a criminal hacks an exchange and steals $10 million, moving that entire sum to a cash-out point in one transaction will immediately trigger an automated freeze. Instead, they write a script to move the funds through a massive sequence of temporary wallets.
Peeling it apart.
Right. At each step in the chain, the script peels off a tiny, seemingly innocuous fraction of the funds, say a few $100s, and routes it to an exchange to be liquidated. The massive remaining balance is forwarded to the next temporary wallet, where the process repeats. They execute this thousands of times across weeks or months, slowly bleeding the massive sum into the fiat system in increments too small to trigger algorithmic tripwires.
But the ultimate obfuscation tool, the technology that gives national security officials the most anxiety, are mixers. Or tumblers. We have to dive deep into the mechanics of a mixer, because this is where the mathematical trail intentionally goes dark.
A mixer is an automated smart contract protocol deployed on a blockchain, designed specifically to break the deterministic link between the sender of a transaction and the receiver. Let's look at the mathematics of it. In a normal transaction, wallet A sends 10 Ethereum to wallet B. The public ledger records this permanently. The link is unbroken. A mixer destroys that link. Imagine 100 different users all depositing 10 Ethereum into a single, massive smart contract pool. The smart contract acts as a cryptographic blender.
And it doesn't just mix the funds, it obfuscates the timing and the amounts of the withdrawals, right?
Exactly. The protocol utilizes technologies like ring signatures or zero-knowledge proofs. When a user is ready to withdraw, the smart contract doesn't return the exact same tokens they deposited. It sends 10 Ethereum from the collective pool to a brand new, clean wallet address provided by the user. Furthermore, users can set randomized time delays depositing on a Monday, but setting the smart contract to execute the withdrawal on a Thursday at 3:1 a.m.
So it's totally scrambled.
Completely. Because dozens of transactions are entering and exiting the pool simultaneously at random intervals, the cryptographic graph analysis tools cannot mathematically prove which specific deposit corresponds to which specific withdrawal. The chain of custody is shattered.
Now, the Treasury report is very careful to distinguish between the technology itself and its illicit use. There is a deeply valid argument for financial privacy on a public blockchain. If I am a corporation paying a supplier, I don't want my competitors analyzing the public ledger to deduce my supply chain costs. If I am an individual donating to a controversial political dissident under an authoritarian regime, I need the privacy of a mixer to protect my life. The technology is neutral.
That nuance is critical. Privacy is a fundamental human right, and on a completely transparent public ledger, mixers provide essential operational security for legitimate users. However, the mathematical reality is that the exact same protocol that protects a political dissident provides perfect cover for a transnational syndicate. Because mixers shatter the tracking graph, illicit actors depend on them.
Which brings us back to the most sophisticated adversary detailed in the report, North Korea. The Treasury explicitly deconstructs the multi-stage laundering playbook the DPRK uses to watch billions in stolen funds. It is a masterclass in exploiting decentralized architecture.
It really is.
Let's walk through this playbook step by step. Let's assume a DPRK cyber unit has just successfully compromised a digital asset service provider and siphoned $500 million in various digital tokens into a wallet they control. The alarms are sounding globally. Every blockchain analytics firm on Earth is watching that wallet. How do they actually move that money without it being frozen?
Step 1 is the initial theft. The moment the funds hit their wallet, they must immediately introduce complexity to outpace the manual response of compliance officers. Step 2, they route the stolen tokens through decentralized exchanges, or DXs.
Why a decentralized exchange? Why not just send it to a massive centralized platform like Binance or Coinbase to cash out?
Because a centralized exchange is operated by a corporation that complies with the Bank Secrecy Act, they have centralized kill switches. If DPRK sends the funds there, the exchange will immediately freeze the account. A decentralized exchange is merely an autonomous smart contract running on the blockchain. There is no CEO, no compliance team, and no kill switch. The DPRK uses the DXX to swap the stolen token, say, they stole a highly illiquid, obscure gaming token, and they swap it for a highly liquid asset like Ethereum.
And they split it up, right?
Yeah, they use complex routing algorithms to split the trades across multiple DX liquidity pools simultaneously to avoid price slippage and further fragment the trail.
So they've swapped the assets across dozens of automated pools. The analytics firms can still follow the graph, but it's getting messy. What is step 3?
Step 3 is the deployment of the mixers we just discussed. They funnel the swapped Ethereum into a high-volume mixing protocol, blending their stolen funds with the transactions of thousands of legitimate users seeking privacy. Step 4. They withdraw the funds from the mixer into fresh, mathematically unlinked, unhosted wallets. These are self-custodial wallets completely controlled by the DPRK's own private keys, with absolutely no connection to any regulated entity.
At this point, the deterministic chain of custody is severely compromised. But they don't stop there.
They assume the analytics firms are using advanced heuristics to try and guess the linkages out of the mixer. So step 5, they mix the funds again, a secondary tumbling process to further degrade the statistical probability of tracing.
Wow.
Step 6 introduces structural isolation. They use cross-chain bridges.
Bridges represent a massive vulnerability in the ecosystem. Let's explain how a bridge actually functions, because it's not a simple transfer. If I want to move value from the Ethereum blockchain over to the Solana blockchain, I can't just send it directly. The networks don't speak the same language. The ledgers are completely isolated. So how does a bridge move the money?
It uses a lock-and-mint mechanism. The DPRK sends their laundered Ethereum to a specific bridge smart contract on the Ethereum network. The contract mathematically locks or freezes that Ethereum so it cannot be used. The bridge protocol then communicates with a corresponding smart contract on the Solana network, verifying the lock has occurred. The Solana contract then mints, or creates, an equivalent amount of synthetic tokens representing the value on the Solana blockchain and deposits them into a new wallet controlled by the DPRK.
This is a nightmare for investigators.
It is the ultimate blind spot, because the asset isn't actually moving across networks, it is being locked on Ledger A and synthetically replicated on Ledger B. The blockchain analytics tools, which map linear transfers, often lose the attribution graph entirely at the bridge interface. The DPRK will chain hop across 3 or 4 different isolated networks using different bridges.
And what is the final stage? They have successfully obfuscated the digital trail. They now hold massive amounts of synthetic value on a distant blockchain. But they can't buy missile components with synthetic tokens. They need hard fiat currency.
Step 7 is conversion to stablecoins. They utilize DXs to swap their bridged assets into stablecoins. Digital tokens cryptographically pegged one-to-one with the US dollar. Stablecoins are the ultimate bridge between the digital and physical economies. Finally, step 8, the cash out. They route these stablecoins to over-the-counter or OTC brokers.
Who are they?
These are often shadowy operations located in jurisdictions with zero AML enforcement. The OTC broker accepts the untraceable stablecoins and physically hands over millions of dollars in fiat currency or wires it to shell company backed accounts in friendly jurisdictions. The laundering cycle is complete.
The coordination required to execute that 8-step process in a matter of hours is staggering. And the Treasury report singles out stablecoins as the critical vulnerability in this final step. The scale of the money flowing through this specific vector is immense.
The Treasury analyzed blockchain data from May 2020 onward, and the metrics are alarming. They identified over $37.4 billion in stablecoin withdrawals originating from just 50 different cross-chain bridges. And in that exact same time frame, those specific bridges received $1.6 billion in deposits that came directly from mixing services.
So you have $1.6 billion flowing straight from a cryptographic blender across a bridge to shatter the tracing graph and emerging as dollar-pegged stablecoins.
And to highlight how concentrated this threat is, over half of that volume, more than $900 million, flowed through one specific bridge protocol that became the preferred laundering rail for the DPRK following several massive heists.
This forces a very practical question about intervention. Let's focus on the stablecoins. Unlike decentralized protocols, major stablecoins like USDC or Tether are issued by centralized corporations. These companies maintain administrative control over the smart contracts that govern the tokens. If the U.S. Treasury or a highly advanced AI analytics firm maps the graph and clearly sees $50 million in stablecoins sitting in a wallet controlled by the DPRK, why doesn't the government just call the stablecoin issuer and order them to freeze the wallet? They have the technical ability to blacklist addresses. Why is this so difficult?
Because the legal liability surrounding that action is paralyzing. Imagine you are the compliance officer for a stablecoin issuer. Your AI monitoring system flags a wallet holding $50 million. The AI's probabilistic model indicates an 85% chance it belongs to a laundering syndicate. But it is not a 100% certainty. If you unilaterally execute a freeze on that wallet and you are wrong, if it turns out to be a legitimate algorithmic trading firm executing a complex, misunderstood strategy, that firm is going to sue you for massive financial damages caused by the freeze.
The issuer assumes all the civil liability, so what do they do instead?
They wait. They refuse to freeze the funds until they receive a formal, legally binding subpoena or seizure warrant from federal law enforcement. The subpoena provides them with legal cover. But obtaining a federal warrant requires prosecutors to draft affidavits, present evidence to a judge, and secure a signature. That process takes days, or sometimes weeks.
And in the digital asset space, waiting days is equivalent to waiting centuries. By the time the ink is dry on the judge's warrant, the DPRK has already moved the stablecoins through 3 more decks, transferred them to an OTC broker in Southeast Asia, and cashed out into fiat. The speed of the law is fundamentally mismatched with the latency of the code.
Which is precisely why the Treasury report includes one of its most consequential policy recommendations. Here's where it gets really interesting. They are urgently requesting that Congress draft and pass a digital asset-specific hold law.
A hold law. Let's unpack the mechanics of what this actual legislation would do.
A hold law would essentially create a statutory safe harbor for financial institutions and stablecoin issuers. It would grant them the legal authority to temporarily freeze digital assets suspected of being involved in illicit activity for a strictly defined short-term window, for example, 48 to 72 hours. During this freeze, the institution is legally immune from civil liability from the user.
It functions as a regulatory pause button.
Exactly. It pauses the automated movement of the ledger just long enough for the human legal system to catch up. The institution triggers the 48-hour hold, immediately contacts law enforcement, and hands over the analytics data. If law enforcement determines a crime is occurring, they have the 48-hour window to secure the formal warrant and execute a permanent seizure. If the transaction is proven legitimate, the hold expires, the funds unlock, and the institution cannot be sued. It bridges the gap between machine latency and legal latency.
That solves the issue for centralized stablecoin issuers. But it doesn't solve the final frontier detailed in the report, the ultimate regulatory paradox that might be entirely unsolvable under the current legal framework: decentralized finance, DeFi.
DeFi is the crucible where 1970s banking law completely melts down. Up until this point, every vulnerability we have discussed involves an intermediary: a bank, an ATM operator, a centralized exchange, a stablecoin issuer. The Bank Secrecy Act relies entirely on forcing these corporate intermediaries to act as the police force, but DeFi eliminates the intermediary entirely.
A decentralized exchange like Uniswap isn't a company executing trades. It is a collection of immutable smart contracts, pure mathematical logic deployed to the Ethereum blockchain. It allows users to swap tokens directly from wallet to wallet, autonomously, driven entirely by code. There are no servers to subpoena, there is no CEO to arrest, there is no compliance department to compel.
So when the DPRK utilizes a DeFi protocol to execute step 2 of their laundering playbook, who is legally responsible for filing the suspicious activity report, how do you apply a regulatory framework designed for human corporations to an autonomous mathematical function? You cannot arrest an algorithm. The Treasury report acknowledges this profound gap and suggests that Congress must completely redefine what constitutes a financial institution in the digital age.
If you can't regulate the code, you have to find the humans who interact with the code. Where are the regulatory choke points in a decentralized system?
The Treasury recommends a principled approach targeting the periphery of the protocol. Even if the core smart contract is immutable, there are usually humans involved in its maintenance and accessibility. For example, they suggest applying anti-money laundering obligations to the developers who build and maintain the user-friendly front-end websites that allow average people to easily interact with the complex smart contract.
But the developers will argue, and they are actively arguing in court right now, that writing open source code and publishing a website is protected free speech under the First Amendment. They aren't executing the trade. The user and the code are executing the trade. The developer just built the tool.
Which is a massive constitutional friction point. Another potential choke point the Treasury identifies involves governance tokens. Many DeFi protocols issue tokens that grant the holders voting rights on how the protocol operates, allowing them to vote on fee structures or code upgrades. The argument is that if a group of individuals holds enough governance tokens to effectively control the protocol's trajectory, they act as a de facto board of directors and therefore should be saddled with the compliance obligations of a financial institution. Furthermore, the report targets relayers, the decentralized network nodes that process and order the transaction data before it is permanently written to the blockchain.
It's an attempt to reverse engineer centralized liability onto a decentralized architecture, and it is incredibly controversial. The crypto community views this as an existential threat to the concept of permissionless innovation. But the regulators look at the raw data. They look at the DPRK laundering billions through DeFi to build nuclear weapons, and they argue that national security supersedes the philosophical purity of decentralization.
It is the defining regulatory battle of the decade. We are attempting to force a square peg of traditional finance law into the multidimensional fractal hole of decentralized cryptography.
We've covered a massive amount of technical and regulatory terrain today. Let's pull the threads together and summarize the reality of this invisible war. We are looking at a global financial ecosystem processing nearly 4 billion transactions a month. We have deeply entrenched adversaries, transnational pig-butchering syndicates stealing billions from retail investors, and rogue nation-states executing complex multi-stage heists to evade global sanctions. The U.S. government, driven by the mandates of the Genius Act, has recognized that legacy rules-based compliance is a mathematical failure.
And in response, they are attempting to deploy a new paradigm of defense, They are leaning into complex graph neural networks to spot the behavioral patterns of laundering in real time. They are pushing for the adoption of cryptographic zero-knowledge proofs and portable digital identities to neutralize the threat of AI-generated synthetic deepfakes. And they are attempting to bind these advanced systems together using high-speed API networks while simultaneously lobbying Congress for new legal tools like the Safe Harbor Hold Law to give the defenders a fighting chance.
This invisible war isn't just an abstract technological debate. It is the defining factor in the security of the modern world. Even if you don't hold a single digital asset, the technology is being forged in this conflict. The AI models, the cryptographic IDs, the API monitoring tools are going to inevitably become the foundational bedrock of the entire traditional financial system. The way your local bank secures your mortgage, your retirement accounts, and your personal identity data will be entirely dictated by the defensive software being engineered to fight the DPRK right now.
The outcome of this digital arms race impacts every participant in the global economy. And if we project these technological trends to their logical conclusion, it raises a deeply provocative final thought. We have spent this entire deep dive discussing how traditional regulatory laws are struggling to keep up with the speed of code, but as the defenses evolve, the code is beginning to become the regulation.
What do you mean by that?
Consider the architecture we've discussed. If we reach a point where digital identities are universally issued as cryptographic tokens, if they are universally issued as tokens, and if those identity tokens are mandated to be embedded directly into the execution logic of every blockchain smart contract,
Right.
and if highly advanced government-audited AI risk-squaring algorithms are integrated directly into the network consensus layers via APIs to automatically block any probabilistic illicit transaction in milliseconds,
Then the enforcement of the law is no longer a human action.
Exactly. Are we moving toward a future where regulation is no longer debated by lawyers, implemented by compliance officers, and adjudicated in courts? Is regulation simply going to be permanently, immutably hard-coded into the very architecture of the internet itself? If the code autonomously decides what value can move and who can move it, based on a neural network's real-time risk assessment, does the permissionless, decentralized web, a technology originally engineered by cypherpunks to bypass the banking system, ironically evolved into the most heavily regulated, perfectly surveilled, and inescapable financial fortress in human history?
That is a staggering paradox to end on. The technology built to guarantee financial freedom ultimately becoming the ultimate mechanism of absolute compliance. The invisible war rages on, and the architecture of our future economy hangs in the balance. We'll leave you to mold that one over.